Church walls are shaking as a storm brews between two powerful men of faith. Bishop Henry Fernandez has finally broken his silence after the shocking firing of Bishop Joel Tudman, and what he reveals is nothing like the polished statements we've heard before. Was this a righteous decision or a scandal the church hoped to bury? Stay tuned, because the truth may change everything you thought you knew about this controversy. When news first broke about Bishop Joel Tudman's sudden firing, the church community and thousands of followers were left in shock. Questions began swirling immediately. Why was he removed so abruptly? Who made the final decision? And what was really happening behind closed doors? Now, after weeks of silence, Bishop Henry Fernandez has finally responded. His words are sparking even more conversations, dividing opinions, and raising serious concerns about power, accountability, and leadership within the church. In this video, we're going to walk you through exactly what Bishop Fernandez said, the hidden details most people haven't heard yet, and the ripple effects this response is creating across the faith community. You won't believe the connections we've uncovered, and trust me, the deeper we go, the more explosive it gets. So, if you've been wondering what truly happened and why this situation matters more than anyone first realized, you're in the right place. Grab your seat, because this is where the story starts to unfold. To understand why Bishop Henry Fernandez's response is so important, we need to go back to the moment when Bishop Joel Tudman's firing became public. For years, Tudman had been a rising voice within the church world. Known for his dynamic preaching style, his ability to connect with younger audiences, and his bold approach to ministry, he wasn't just another church leader, he was quickly becoming one of the most influential. People began calling him a spiritual disruptor, someone who could bridge traditional church culture with modern believers. Then, seemingly overnight, it all came crashing down. The announcement of his firing was sudden, with little explanation provided to the public. Followers were stunned, church members were confused, and critics immediately smelled something bigger at play. How could someone with such growing influence be removed so abruptly? The official statements offered very little clarity. Words like leadership transition and organizational restructuring were thrown around, but none of them answered the burning question: why Joel Tudman, and why now? That's where whispers began circulating about tension behind the scenes. Tension between Tudman and other powerful figures in leadership, including Bishop Henry Fernandez. Some insiders claimed Tudman's popularity and bold vision may have been viewed as a threat. Others suggested disagreements over church direction and finances may have played a role. But with no clear explanation, speculation filled the silence. This uncertainty created a ripple effect across the Christian community. Social media exploded with debates. Supporters of Tudman demanded transparency, while others stood by leadership, trusting the decision was made for the good of the church. The lack of answers only fueled the fire. And here's where it gets even more interesting. While most church leaders kept quiet, distancing themselves from the controversy, Bishop Henry Fernandez, one of the most recognized and respected voices in ministry, was directly linked to the decision. People wanted to know, was Fernandez part of the move? Did he support it, or was he just another leader dragged into the headlines? For weeks, Fernandez remained silent. But silence in this case wasn't peace, it was gasoline on the flames of speculation. The longer he waited, the louder the rumors became. And then, finally, Fernandez spoke. But what he revealed wasn't just a casual response, it was a direct confrontation of the controversy, filled with statements that left some applauding and others in disbelief. But before we break down what Bishop Henry Fernandez actually said, we need to understand the history between him and Bishop Tudman. Because once you see their relationship in context, the weight of Fernandez's response becomes even clearer. To truly grasp the impact of Bishop Henry Fernandez's response, we need to step back and look at the history between him and Bishop Joel Tudman. This wasn't just a casual relationship between two men of faith. Their paths had crossed in ways that shaped both their ministries, and that's why Fernandez's silence and eventual response carried such weight. Bishop Henry Fernandez has long been recognized as a pillar of leadership in the church world. Known for his ability to grow congregations, mentor younger leaders, and create platforms that expand the reach of ministry, Fernandez has built a reputation as a man of influence. He has often been viewed as both a guide and a gatekeeper in church leadership circles. Enter Joel Tudman. Bold, charismatic, and unafraid to challenge tradition, Tudman was quickly rising as a voice that appealed to a new generation of believers. He wasn't the type to simply follow the established order, He was determined to bring fresh energy into the church, and in doing so, he attracted both admiration and criticism. It didn't take long before observers noticed a connection between Tudman and Fernandez. On the surface, the two men appeared to respect each other, sharing platforms and occasionally aligning in ministry work. Fernandez, with his experience and standing, seemed to provide a covering of credibility for Tudman. Tudman, with his passion and innovation, represented the kind of boldness that many saw as the future of the church. But beneath that seemingly smooth partnership, insiders whispered about friction. Tudman's growing influence sometimes clashed with Fernandez's established leadership. Some said Fernandez admired Tudman's drive but worried about his methods. Others suggested Tudman felt restrained by the older generation of leaders who wanted him to fit into a mold he had no intention of accepting. At church events, their interactions appeared cordial, even warm. But behind closed doors, tensions simmered. Decisions about finances, leadership structure, and the direction of the ministry became sticking points. While Fernandez leaned toward stability and tradition, Tudman pushed for expansion, digital growth, and unconventional outreach methods. Supporters of Tudman claimed that Fernandez and other senior leaders feared being overshadowed by a rising star who refused to play by the rules. Supporters of Fernandez, on the other hand, argued that Tudman was moving too fast, too bold, and needed more accountability before taking on greater responsibilities. This complex dynamic between mentor and protege, supporter and challenger, created an undercurrent of rivalry that most members of the congregation never saw. But those who were closer to the inner circle noticed the strain. So when Tudman's firing became public, it wasn't just about the removal of a leader, it was about a rupture in a relationship many thought would shape the future of ministry together. People wanted answers. Did Fernandez play a direct role in pushing Tudman out, or was he simply caught in the storm of decisions made by others? And that brings us back to Fernandez's long-awaited response. Because once he finally spoke, his words revealed not only his perspective on Tudman's firing, but also the hidden complexities of their history together. And trust me, what Fernandez said next is where this story takes a dramatic turn. After weeks of building speculation, Bishop Henry Fernandez finally broke his silence. The anticipation surrounding his response was enormous. People wanted clarity, they wanted accountability, and most of all, they wanted to hear Fernandez address the swirling rumors head-on. When Fernandez stepped forward, it wasn't through a quick post or a short statement. Instead, he chose his words carefully, delivering them in a way that made it clear he understood the gravity of the moment. He knew the world was listening, and his reputation, as well as the future of his ministry, was on the line. In his response, Fernandez did not shy away from the controversy. He acknowledged that the firing of Bishop Joel Tudman had created confusion and division. He admitted that the lack of immediate explanation had fueled speculation. And then, in a tone both firm and measured, he offered his perspective on what had taken place. Fernandez framed his comments around leadership, accountability, and the responsibility of guiding a spiritual community. He emphasized that decisions at this level are never made lightly, and while painful, sometimes they are necessary for the greater health of the church. Without naming names directly, he suggested that Tudman's approach to ministry may not have aligned with the broader vision of leadership. This statement alone was explosive. To Tudman's supporters, it sounded like Fernandez was confirming what they had feared, that Tudman's innovative style and growing influence had put him at odds with the more traditional hierarchy. To Fernandez's supporters, however, it sounded like wisdom, an experienced leader making a hard call to protect the stability of the ministry. But Fernandez didn't stop there. In one of the most striking parts of his response, he warned against idolizing personalities within the church. He stated that no individual, no matter how charismatic or popular, should be placed above the mission of the ministry. This was a thinly veiled reference that many interpreted as pointing directly to Tudman. These words immediately ignited further debate. Was Fernandez cautioning against the dangers of celebrity pastors, or was he taking a subtle jab at Tudman, who had become known for his wide social media influence and modern, attention-grabbing style? The ambiguity left room for interpretation, but the underlying message was clear. Fernandez believed the church must remain bigger than any one man. What struck many people, however, was what Fernandez didn't say. He never outright accused Tudman of wrongdoing, nor did he provide a detailed explanation of the internal conflicts. His words danced carefully between defense and critique, enough to address the controversy, but not enough to silence the questions. Reactions poured in almost instantly. Social media lit up with divided opinions. Some praised Fernandez for his wisdom and restraint, calling his statement a necessary reminder that the church is about Christ, not personalities. Others accused him of sidestepping responsibility, suggesting his carefully chosen words were more about protecting his image than revealing the truth. Even more interesting, some insiders claimed that Fernandez's response revealed more than he intended. By emphasizing unity, accountability, and the danger of idolizing leaders, they argued that Fernandez indirectly confirmed the very power struggles people had been whispering about all along. The fallout of his response didn't end there. In fact, Fernandez's words set the stage for a deeper debate about transparency in church leadership, generational clashes within ministry, and the growing divide between tradition and innovation. But here's the part they don't want you to miss. Fernandez's response wasn't just about Tudman. It was also about preserving his own authority, protecting his legacy, and shaping how this story would be remembered in the years to come. And when you look closer at the timing and tone of his statement, another layer of this controversy comes into focus, one that might be even more revealing than the words themselves. When Bishop Henry Fernandez finally addressed the firing of Bishop Joel Tudman, most people immediately latched onto what he said. But just as important, maybe even more important, was the timing and the way he delivered his message. Because in controversies like this, silence and strategy often speak louder than words. Let's start with the timing. Fernandez didn't respond immediately after the firing was announced. He waited. Days turned into weeks, and in that silence, speculation took on a life of its own. Why would a leader of his stature hold back for so long? Was he weighing his words carefully, or was he watching the public's reaction before deciding how to position himself? For critics, the delay was a red flag. They argued that Fernandez's silence looked like damage control, an attempt to distance himself from responsibility until the public conversation reached its boiling point. Others, however, saw it differently. They believed Fernandez was displaying wisdom, refusing to react out of emotion and instead waiting until he could speak with clarity and authority. But here's where the hidden messages come in. When Fernandez finally spoke, the language he used was layered. On the surface, it was about leadership, accountability, and the mission of the church. But underneath, his choice of words suggested something deeper. Take, for example, his repeated emphasis on unity. He stressed that division within the body of Christ could not be tolerated and that the health of the church must always come first. That may sound like a standard leadership statement, but many insiders read between the lines. To them, it was a subtle admission that there had indeed been division, real conflict that was threatening to split the ministry apart. Another hidden message came through his comments about personalities and idolization. Fernandez warned against elevating individuals above the church itself. On the surface, that's a valid and even biblical point. But let's be honest, given the context, who else could he have been talking about except Joel Tudman? Tudman's social media following, his rising influence, and his unconventional style made him a lightning rod for attention. By highlighting this issue, Fernandez seemed to be framing Tudman not as a victim of unjust firing, but as someone whose popularity had become a liability. And then there's the delivery itself. Fernandez didn't come across defensive, nor did he come across as angry. Instead, he chose a calm, measured tone, like a leader addressing a storm but refusing to let the storm shake him. That composure was strategic. To supporters, it projected strength and wisdom. To critics, it felt rehearsed, even calculated. Now let's talk about why this timing matters so much. In public controversies, the person who controls the narrative usually controls the outcome. By waiting until the firestorm of speculation had reached its peak, Fernandez ensured that when he finally spoke, everyone would be paying attention. His words carried more weight because the suspense had already built to a breaking point. But the danger of waiting is that it also allows rumors to grow unchecked. And some argue that Fernandez's silence may have backfired, because by the time he spoke, the narrative had already formed in the minds of many. That Tudman was ousted unfairly, and Fernandez had played a key role. His carefully chosen words may not have been enough to change those perceptions. This is where the real controversy lies, not just in what Fernandez said, but in what his words implied, and in the silence that came before them. Was Fernandez trying to protect the church, or was he trying to protect himself? Was his response an act of leadership, or was it a calculated move to control the damage?